And he turns to the sheriff and says, "Hey, I got a question for you." And the sheriff, I think, says, "What's that?" And he says, "What's the penalty for perjury? One of my homies is on trial. He didn't do it. They made me say it. I didn't want to say that."
And do we know, have we seen this? Do we know who the sheriff is?
Yeah.
What's his name?
John Hamilton.
The sheriff was relaying, Brian said that this wasn't true. And so they let Brian get back on the stand to say what he said to the sheriff.
Pretty damn credible. Now, I have someone here who I think could help clear this up a little bit, and I'd like to bring him in if you don't mind. So we're going to have to move that table in a sec. But Alessi, can you bring him in? So, fast forward to the trial now. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Brian Brooks gets on the stand. He's like the star witness. He, as we've already laid out, is someone who is testifying to help his own case. He's brought into the courtroom. What happens?
Well, he testifies that Tyree had a gun, that he had seen the gun, I think even, weeks before the crime. I mean, he completely implicates Tyree.
And planned it.
Right, over the a good period of testimony. And then I guess something nags Brian.
I mean, the fact that he's testifying in court and having to look at Tyree face to face and everyone else face to face and say what's just blatantly untrue according to everything else. He then gets off the stand, has a come to Jesus moment.
Yeah, he ends up in the adjacency area, I think they call it.
The adjacency area?
Yeah, so there's like in the Criminal Justice Center, there's a area where people who are witnesses can go where they don't have to interact with the general public. Okay. So that there's no intimidation, there's no anyone saying, "Hey, you better say something different." He ends up in it's called like an adjacent room to the courtroom.
Have you seen, I'm curious, have you seen extensively studied whatever the cross-examination was of Tyree's lawyer on Brian Brooks, what that looked like before we get to the next part?
Yeah, because this is the area that's really critical. I think so. Tyree's lawyer, there's two lawyers that cross-examined, Raheem's lawyer and Tyree's lawyer.
Okay.
Tyree's lawyer basically asks him, was he given a deal in exchange for his testimony?
Promises,
anything. And promises come in terms of you'll get some time off of what you could be looking at if you give us and cooperate with us and testify against, these two people. And I think he says no.
Right. It was obvious to Tyree's lawyers at the time that something didn't quite smell right about the veracity of what Brian was saying.
Right.
Given how much was weighing on him, in terms of sentence.
His own potential.
Right. Are you sure that there weren't promises for your testimony in any way? And he was asked a couple of times, and he said no. But I guess it got to him a little bit.
Well, he also was asked about the multiple statements that he made and the contradicting of the statements. And
this is the key part, really.
Yeah, right. And then the, this December statement that just no one seems to kind of understand. But Brian sticks to his original statement saying, yeah, Tyree planned it. Tyree had a gun. I've seen the gun before, blah, blah, blah. Now, they still never found a gun. There was no gun ever brought in to the trial.
Right.
But in any event, Brian Brooks puts the gun in his hand, gets off the stand, and then you can tell.
Yeah, he ends up in the adjacency. I think he actually, maybe he wasn't supposed to be where he was, but he ends up in the adjacency area. There's the sheriff or the bailiff is there, and he turns to the sheriff and says, "Hey, I got a question for you." And the sheriff, I think, says, "What's that?" And he says, "What's the penalty for perjury? One of my homies is on trial. He didn't do it. They made me say that. I didn't want to say that."
And do we know, have we seen this? Do we know who the sheriff is?
Yeah.
What's his name?
John Hamilton.
So John Hamilton has this guy basically walk off the stand, like fresh off this, and ask what the penalty for perjury is.
I think, if I recall, I'd have to go back to the transcript. I think that the sheriff would soon be called to testify himself. Does it from memory. He wasn't writing anything down, but I think he...
So he did testify in this trial.
I think he was brought to the stand, and there was some discussion about this, and I think the sheriff knew, I got to go talk to the judge, and did. And then, of course, Tyree's lawyers, I think they called for a mistrial. That was
denied.
And the prosecution, you know what the prosecution did? The prosecution basically pulled out the
police statement.
Pulled out the February statement, the very excruciatingly detailed statement, and basically said, Brian, let's go back over all the specific details you gave us in February. And I think there's readings of a lot of that statement.
But I think you didn't tell the best part. Brian gets back on the stand and recants his story.
Wait, he recanted it?
On the stand in the same trial.
So there's also a serious jury mistake here. Because very, very clearly there's no murder weapon. There's no one who places Tyree at the crime. There's slightly someone who places Shackleford there. And he ended up admitting to some of this stuff later. So we know that. And you have the main witness say this to the sheriff of the court, who then gets on the stand, reports that, and then the same guy gets back on the stand. The witness gets back on the stand, says, "Oh yeah, no, this is wrong," and he's not charged with perjury.
No, because what happens is once he does that, the DA cross-examines him, and I'm just going to say in their closing, the DA convinces the jury that the only reason why Brian Brooks gets back on the stand and recants is because he's afraid. Because now he's going to be intimidated. Now something's going to happen to him. And the jury buys that, right? Because look, we're talking about 1997, a homicide, right? We got these two black males charged with homicide. And now you've got a guy who's saying he did it. And of course, the DA is very artful and skilled, knows that anyone in the same neighborhood who's going to get up on the stand and testify against his boy is going to have problems.
But he told a cop. He told the sheriff of the court, the man in the law enforcement officer in charge of the court,
the one that's in charge of bringing and we should say Brian Brooks was in custody at this time, so the sheriff is he's being transported from prison to testify at trial because he's in custody on that knife point robbery. So he's now back in custody, and he's only back in custody because he's gonna be back in custody because he knows he's got to face the music for his other stuff. So he's working that stuff down. He goes into court and he testifies that first Tyree has something to do with it. Goes off, has a change of heart, says to the sheriff, "Hey, I just lied, pretty much. I committed perjury. Was perjury." Gets back on the stand, tries to recant. The DA cross-examines him, and then in her closing says, "Hey, what Brian said in the beginning was the truth, and the only reason he recanted is because he's afraid and intimidated as to when he gets back into the neighborhood, something's going to happen to him."
And they took the prosecutor's word there on this trial and clearly ignored, in this law and order time, right? They ignored the sheriff who got on the stand. And
well, the sheriff doesn't know if it's true or not. The sheriff was just relaying.
But he's reporting what he heard.
The sheriff was relaying. Brian said he didn't, that wasn't true. And so they let Brian get back on the stand to say what he said to the sheriff.
Pretty damn credible. Now, I have someone here who I think could help clear this up a little bit, and I'd like to bring him in if you don't mind. So we're going to have to move that table in a sec. But Alessi, can you bring him in?
Hey.
Hi.
How's everybody?
Thanks for being here.
How you doing?
I'm good. We're going to move this right here.
How are you?
David Perry.
Hi, I'm Keir Bradford-Grey.
Mr. Keir, how are you? Nice to meet you, ma'am.
Yeah. Hi.
Hello there, Alessi.
So
Nice
we're
to
gonna
meet you.
we're gonna slide you right there,
Hi there, Alessi.
Dave.
Pleasure to meet you.
and then I'm gonna send you right back out. Let's get bench. All right. And then if we
Welcome
can
back to
pull-
Philly.
Yeah, it's not where I'd rather
Well,
be,
Jersey.
but
If
well,
we
Jersey's
can just,
good.
if we can pull your mic, Dave, like sit down, and then we'll pull yours towards the middle, and kind of set it up in between you.
You want this one?
Here, can I just scoot around?
You sure
here real
can.
quick?
Oh, I'm not
I know
taking
it's a
your
little
seat,
tight
am I,
back
young
there.
lady?
Would you say, sir?
I'm not taking your seat, am I?
Not at all.
You're good. You're good. So, Keir, we'll leave your mic on you, and then Dave, can we just move your drink right there and pull this in towards a little bit?
So good to meet you.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, well, I'm going to swing this camera.
Yeah. Wow.
Do this one right here. Sorry, everyone listening. We're doing a little bit of an extra production here because we got our special guest. But in case you didn't hear us with the little intros back there.
Can you? I don't think you can see his face. Can you?
Yeah, not on yours, but we can on Dave's, so we're good. In case you didn't hear the intro, thank you for being here, Sheriff John.
No problem.
I was on the phone with Tyree about 2 months ago, and he had mentioned that he had gotten you on the phone once, and this is years later and everything, but he had said, I wonder if he would do a video testimonial we could include with this podcast. And the minute he said that, I was like, no, we got to get this guy here. We got to talk to him, see what he saw. And so, number one, thank you for taking a couple days to come up here and do this. I'm glad you could see your family while you're up here too. You're down in South Carolina now.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to going back down.
But just
Nothing against Philly anymore, but it's.
he gets off the plane. It's like, God damn, I need to get back there already.
I hate this place.
Right away.
I used to love the city,
But I want to do a little background on you just so that we can get this all the way through. What I want you to do is pull that mic in a little bit to you. So, yep, nice and good. So you can talk right into it. But how many years did you spend on the force, and can you just explain your background with Philadelphia?
Yeah, I started in '86 as a prison guard at Philadelphia. In 9 years, I made sergeant. Spent about a year and a half as a sergeant. When I was a prison guard, I applied to the sheriff's office for the job. And out of the clear blue, I get a call one day to meet with the sheriff, and he says, "You interested?" And I said, yes. So I switched over to the sheriff's office and spent, I think, the next 17 years there.
So before we get to you in the courtroom and being in charge of the homicide court for what was it, 10 years?
About 10 years.
With the
10
sheriff's
years.
office. Serious job. But before that, when you were working in prison, because you and I had a chance to go out to lunch yesterday and talk about your career, and one of the things that really struck me is that your memory is unbelievable. I was telling these guys on camera, just so you know, because you've been downstairs during this time, you had talked about guys always come in there, they're innocent for the first year, maybe 2, 3 if they're really committed.
If they're really committed.
But the
the
guys who are actually innocent, they usually never really give that up.
They don't stop.
Yeah.
It's been my experience. They don't stop. I mean, think about you're in prison. You got found guilty. Let's say you're doing 10 years for a robbery.
Talk into it a little more.
You're doing 10 years for a robbery.
Yeah.
Okay? First year in jail, you're bored. You don't have your homies on the street. You got to do something. So I'm going to fight for my innocence. I mean, everything's free that they give you, and I mean, you're accommodated to do all that. And it seems like the guys that are just trying to beat time to get to their next thing are the ones that, they're just playing. They're not, But the guys that are innocent that didn't do it, they're the ones that will protest that until the day they die. Mm-hmm. They will tell you, I didn't do it. And it's not just, I didn't do it. I didn't do it, and for these reasons. And when you spend, and I didn't know it was 24 years, but when you spend 26 years in prison, how does that happen? I mean, if this guy, and let me say this, I hope to God that this man does get out and get a chance. I'm afraid for him if he does, because this world has changed so much. Yeah. I mean, they didn't have cell phones back then. They didn't have a lot of things back then. I know he lost his mother. So how do you come out after 24, 25, 26 years and start again?
It's hard.
How? Yeah. Now, I don't know. I just, I've always been the champion for the bad guy. Not the bad guy. Like when when I was growing up, kids got picked on. I stood up for them.
Right.
When I took the job in law enforcement in the prisons, I saw things that I never thought I'd see. I was a North Philly boy, raised in Bradford-Grey, didn't know anything about that and that. First week in the prison, I haven't seen guys getting whacked up 30, 40 times, getting killed, and I'm like, I made a mistake. But I liked the fact that in that time, I met people that I really believed were innocent because they would talk to me a different way than the hood rat would. Mm-hmm. As a defender, you know him. As soon as you meet the guy, you spend 5 minutes with him, you know the guys. Look, he's just playing. Mm-hmm. He did it. most of the lawyers I would hear say, look, I know this guy did it, but I'm doing my job. I mean, if you don't see that, you're kind of blind if you spend that much time in the system. Yeah. But when you hear about a guy like this, when I first heard about this, when I had moved from the city and went to Georgia, I was like, damn, he went to jail for that? Wait a minute, I thought the testimony. And then I never heard anything. Then I moved to South Carolina.
How many in 10 years, ballpark, how many homicide trials were you overseeing the courtroom for?
I was assigned to room 702. That was Judge Greenspan. Matter of fact, she married me. Very good, very good judge. I did all the homicides in that room. The last case I did in that room was a child homicide, and I wouldn't do it. I told them I won't do homicides anymore. I'll transport. I'll go in any courtroom. I'll do the rape courtrooms, but I don't want to do the homicides anymore because I just couldn't deal. I did some very well known cases that if it was up to me, but it's not up to me.
Right.
I have a job. My job says A, B, and C. I do A, B, and C. If it says if A happens, you have to do B, and if A happens, I'm going to do B. Because number one, I don't want to get hurt. Number two, this guy's got a dad, he's got a brother, he's got a daughter somewhere. Yeah, I mean, let's give him the benefit of the doubt. What's it going to hurt? He's already in jail, right?
Yep.
But yeah, I probably did over the years 1,000 homicide cases, maybe. Everyone that went through that room, I was there.
Thank you for watching the video, guys. Please hit that subscribe button and check out this clip's full podcast episode by clicking here or in the description below.